Poker's power couple played out. Blind versus blind.
What?
Raise.
Both with a couple hands.
Here comes a domestic.
Foxen makes it 35K with the ace deuce of spades. Bicknell with sevens makes the call. Comes 8-5 deuce. Or seven still best.
Pretty interesting. Alex may believe that ace deuce is the best of it at the moment. I don't think he always would raise ace deuce suited. Probably elects to simply call some of the time.
He'll lead here for 27,000.
Yeah, in his mind, this is very much a value bet. And that tune will change once Kristen elects to simply call here. I don't really see any reason for raising, maybe to shut down the action to prevent any sort of overcards from peeling on the turn. And that's exactly what she's going to do.
Makes it 80,000.
Now, all of a sudden, things get interesting. If Alex is a non-believer, what would she do that with? I would certainly see a lot of bluff raises here. What would you do with a hand like Queen Jack, 10 Jack, 10-9? Yeah, non-believer.
The call from Foxen.
The most notable thing so far, for sure, is Bicknell's raise on this flop. Typically, you don't see good players raising a hand like sevens on this 8-high, relatively dry, but wet with straight draws board. What do you think about that, Jonathan?
I think this is a function of two players who know each other's games intimately. Like these guys, for anyone who doesn't know, these guys have been dating for a long time, years at this point. They're two of the best players in the world, and Kristen just knows the kinds of hands that Alex is going to show up with here, and also knows the kinds of hands he's going to continue with. And so most people, if they were to raise here, they'd be finding out where they're at, right? They'd be raising for information or trying to deny equity so an ace doesn't come off on the river. On the turn. I don't know that that's what's happening here with Kristen. I think she might just be straight raising for value and believing she can get called by a lot worse hands because she knows Alex's game that well. She thinks he's going to call with any pair and probably even a lot of overcards when they're this deep. And he's just not going to believe her that much because this board is so much more her than him.
Yeah, I think this raise serves a couple functions. If you look at the cards on the board and you think Alex is calling with all pairs, then you're getting called by eights, which is bad, but there's more fives and deuces available than eights because, there's two of those and one of the eights. Now, maybe Foxen doesn't have all of the deuces and all of the fives because he raised pre-flop and they're super deep and he doesn't need to raise everything pre-flop unless it's a holistic strategy he has. But yeah, typically I think she's trying to get called by worse hands. This is a value play. Foxen does have overpairs in his range. That's problematic. If he doesn't call with any hands that are just two overcards, I think that makes this a lot worse by Bicknell. Like if Foxen is not ever calling with ace-jack or hands like that, that becomes problematic because there are overpairs, there are eights. I don't know if the fives and deuces and pocket threes and pocket fours and sixes are enough to make up for that. But if he's calling with just two overcards, I think it's okay.
This also could be weirdly enough, a pot control strategy by her, where by raising now, she doesn't have to face a big bet on turn and river, which is what often is going to happen. What good players do against each other nowadays is tiny bet on the flop, big bet on the turn, big bet on the river. Not always, but a lot of the time you're going to see that line. And so by raising to 80K right now, it's like she's getting a much cheaper turn because she knows she's calling almost any turn anyway. And then she gets to decide what she wants to do on the river, be it. And she can bet the turn, by the way, small, and then she can check the river, or she can just check the turn and either call or bet on the river, depending on how the board comes out and what Alex does. So it may be a sort of a very unusual pot control strategy too, not one you really ever see. But again, she knows his game. She knows he probably doesn't have that many three bets here. How could he?
Right. And of course he doesn't. And of course he does call, which, makes sense with a pair against a good thinking player who's going to be balanced on a board that has plenty of straight draws. I don't think Foxen can profitably fold when he flops this well, even though it's uncomfortable. So his play seems pretty standard to me so far. If you want to call with bottom pair, the best place to do it is Nitrogen Sports Poker, a site in which if you use the link in our pinned tweet when you sign up, you get access to our exclusive Poker Guys monthly tournament. Jonathan, tell them about it.
It's fabulous. They guarantee 1,000 buy-ins They only allow 300 players, which means there's always a massive overlay. We usually get like 200 players. It's unbelievable. It's also super cheap to play. It's a tenth of a millibit because it's all Bitcoin, which plays at this point, that's like $1, give or take, to play. I mean, the free money is just crazy. They just shovel in all this extra money in the prize pool, and you just get to get a piece of it because you're playing in this tournament. It's crazy not to play in it.
4 spades on the turn. Wheel draw now for Foxen. 240K in the pot. It goes check on the turn.
Oh my.
And Foxen rivers another deuce.
How does he do it? Starts off 2020 the exact way he finished 2019. Plays great, runs great. How much? Certainly looking to get paid off here. We can assume a bet is incoming. I don't see really why Chrissy, she may consider folding. Tough to show up with a lot of bluffs, but it is Alex.
Almost a pot-sized bet.
And
In fact, a bit of an overbet. Bets 255K into 240.
If Chrissy calls here, I'm afraid Alex is going to be a single man.
And she will make that call. She will see the bad news.
Foxen goes for the big value and gets it on the Miracle Deuce on the river. Is this a function of Bicknell's check on the turn? It's a weird line that Bicknell has taken here with her 2 sevens with any hand. I mean, it feels like she's a little bit face up as having a medium strength hand when she checks back the turn. It feels like if she made a straight or had a very strong hand, she would keep betting most of the time, at least on the turn. Do you think that has any impact on Foxen's sizing?
I think there's a few things that impact it. That probably is part of it, that like he would have to choose big sizing to get her to fold these medium strength hands, and he knows it and she knows it. And so it plays well both for his bluffs and for his value, number one. Number two, he is in a place where he has what is almost always the best hand. It'd be sort of shocking I'm sure he's calling a raise if she were to raise here. It's just hard to imagine he doesn't have the best hand. And so he's near the very, very top of his range. He can certainly have some full houses. He can have a straight, but this is the next best hand really after the straight. And so I think he's also able to polarize that way as well. It's also cool because the deuce should be either a scare card or an unlikely card to help him. And so for him to bet so big is interesting and weird, and maybe makes it a little easier for her to call with her medium strength hands also. So for all those reasons, I like it.
Yeah, I agree. The bigger question is, how should Bicknell respond? Yeah. Keeping in mind that we've taken this strange line. I don't even know where Bicknell falls in her distribution. Does she have any 8s, or does she bet an 8 on the turn? If she often bets 8s on the turn, 7s might be near the very top of her distribution. It also has great blockers as far as distribution is concerned, as it blocks 6-7, which got there on the turn. So does that make this a call alone? That perhaps she's near the top of her distribution, both blocker-wise and hand rank-wise?
I mean, when he chooses this polarizing sizing and we block the most obvious straight to come in, yeah, maybe. Maybe that is enough against a guy who we know is going to be pretty balanced in this spot, who isn't going to be very value-heavy here. Now, she should know, in fact, based on their relationship, if he's liable to bluff her a lot or not in an early part of a tournament. We know, like, if they were 5-handed at the final table and there's a lot of money in play, I think he's less likely to make a lot of big polarizing bluffs against her. We've seen that in the past anyway, at least her believing that, right, where she folded aces when they were 3-handed in a big spot once. But this is day one. Like, they're going to take more shots at each other. They're deep. This is, even if she calls and loses, which we see she does, it's not a mortal wound to her stack or anything like that.
Right.
It just hurts a little bit. It's just 25 blinds. So, I mean, I think probably the 7s and the fact that it's Alex, meaning he can be balanced here and probably has enough bluffs, means we probably are supposed to call. But I don't know for sure, man. It's not fun, but it may be one of the best hands we ever have. And that is a reason to call.
As far as The blockers are so good too, and I think that's important because if we look at it from a different angle, which is what are the bluffs, it becomes a bit more difficult to figure that out. And Bicknell certainly would know better than us because she talks poker with Foxen all the time, what types of hands he's choosing to bluff here. But from a more general poker standpoint, it's a lot harder to think of bluffs for Foxen than it is to think of value.
Yeah.
So that's slightly problematic as far as calling. But I think against a player like Foxen, you have to lean more on distribution than that type of theory. And distribution-wise, this might be the best hand to call with.
Yeah, like we have to assume that Foxen is going to be relatively balanced anyway, so then we have to figure out where this hand falls in distribution and go from there. The only bluffs that even kind of make sense for Alex to have, turning a 5 into a bluff, turning ace-4 into a bluff, or turning overcards that he called the raise with on the flop with into a bluff. And so we have to know he can even call with overcards on the flop, which I think she's raising for value and believing he's going to call with a bunch of his ace-highs on the flop. But then he also has to decide to bluff them and with the sizing on the river, which I think he might do based on the line that she took, checking back the turn.
Yeah, I agree with that. So all of that, you put it in a blender, and this is a fold against most players in the world. But against a player like Alex Foxen, I don't think I can fault the call. I think the distribution aspect of it is enough to justify it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's one of those you sigh, you roll your eyes, you throw the chip in, you feel dumb when you lose. Although at least he's polarized. At least he has one of the very best hands he can have here. If he had like ace-8, you might not feel so good that he got more than pot value out of you. But he has a monster at least, so that's good, right? Kristen Bicknell playing the hero. This time did not work out. But she is against one of the other best players in the world, and this is one heck of a spot. What do you think about the lines that Kristen took here? I think most of Alex's decisions are pretty straightforward in this hand, but Kristen deciding to raise on the flop and checking back the turn and ultimately calling this massive river bet. Do you like it or not? Let us know if you like it and what things you would do differently and why, if there are anything.
Yep, let's hear about that. Also, if you want to hear more of our thoughts on this hand, you got to check out our podcast. It is the Breakdown Poker Podcast with the Poker Guys. You can get it anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all that other stuff. Get it anywhere. Get it there. You can also get our book, by the way, which is pretty sweet. Jonathan wants to talk about that.
Yeah, we just finished in the top 8 in the Poker GOAT, the greatest of all time competition. This book finished in the top 8, people. That means it's pretty darn good. It actually was called a classic by people, not us, somehow. That's how good this book is. You'd be crazy. If you like this video, you're crazy not to get this book. You're going to eat it up.